Welcome to the Slim Nation 101's podcast.
Yeah.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Slim Nation's One-on-Ones podcast. I'm Slim Overton here with you this evening. And before I get started, make sure you like. If you're watching on Facebook, make sure you like. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share. And as far as the comments go, you can comment live here if you have any questions for our guest. And of course, our guest is Shona Swinson. Shona Choke Swinson. Some of you might know her as Shona Choke from the P-Town from Portsmouth, Virginia. And one of my graduate buddies from IC Norcom. And I have to tell you about this, the class of 72 was one of the greatest classes to come out. And Shona was so excited to come out with that class of 72. She skipped the grade so she could come out with us. Well, she would have come out in 73. So that just shows you how dynamic that class of 72 was, like all the classes of IC North.
Historic is more like
Historic. Yes. She graduated so she could boycott with us. We did have a boycott. But anyway, my guest is Shona Swinson, and welcome, Shona. Glad to have you here. You know, we tried to do this. Had tried to do this a few days ago and had some technical difficulties, but hopefully we'll make it through this tonight. And hopefully all the people that were waiting last time will come back on and watch some of your important story. So let me start. After high school, so we had a great time in high school. I talk about high school now. How much fun we used to have. And we learned, we had those teachers that made sure we got our lessons and trying to prepare us for the world that we were facing once we got out of high school. But we had a lot of fun. It's kind of different now with some high school teenagers that are serious. I mean, well, there's nothing wrong with being serious. But anyway, once you graduate from high school, what was your direction? What had you planned to do? We all have, sometimes we graduate and have no idea of what we want to do. We just have to take a year off and just try to figure it out. So, but what were your plans, or what did you do immediately after high school?
Well, I attended Old Dominion University for a while. Just after high school. I mean, remember, I was actually from a different class. So when I graduated from high school, I was 16, whereas everybody else around me was, 18, 19, maybe a few 17. But anywho, I went to Old Dominion University for a while. My father passed away, and my life took a different path after he passed away. I ended up getting married. I had 2 children with my husband, and we ran into a lot of difficulties. We were extremely young. You know how that goes. But back then, that's what you did. But neither one of us were really ready for marriage. But like I said, we had 2 kids, so I had to grow up very quickly. So after my husband and I did not make it, about 3 to 4 years into the marriage, we separated. So I found myself having to go to work to take care of my kids because, of course, the kids came with me. So I found a part-time job during the day and also a part-time job at night. So I worked 2 jobs. So that meant that I had to pretty much my whole paycheck for one of the jobs went to daycare to take care of my kids while I worked. So it was pretty tough. I had moved back home with my mother. Um, And at the time that I separated from my husband, I had been knowing what would become my son's father uh, about a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was there. We worked together all day, every day, and we got to know each other pretty well. We went out to a lot of social events as groups because back then we went to a lot of house parties and stuff like that.
Yeah, that
Uh,
was the thing back in the day. Yeah,
huh?
house parties was the thing back in the day.
Yes, it was. Yes, it
Yeah.
was. And those dances at the Shriners Club and all of that sort of thing. Uh, so like I said, we were friends. He was very charming, very kind, um, and he seemed to love children and definitely women. He was very friendly to all of uh, the rest of our employees there where we worked. We were a
Mhm.
pretty tight knit group actually for a good while. Um, so not long, well, about a year after I left my husband, we started dating. And like I said, he was really charming now.
Mhm.
Um, and I became pregnant with child very early on after we decided that we were a couple.
Okay.
Yes. And so those seeds of seeds and signs of jealousies and you know odd behavior really started creeping in right around I would say after I was maybe 6 months pregnant. He was
Mhm.
just becoming really possessive.
Let,
And
let me let me stop you there for a minute, and you mentioned about your first marriage, well, your marriage in with your husband, and that didn't work out. And do you think, because sometimes when we come out of a situation like that, we kind of look for something maybe a little too soon, and maybe some of those signs might be there, but we overlook it because you know what you were missing in the first time. You might have been looking for that. I don't know if that's your case, and you might have missed some of the signs that might have been showing itself.
I didn't find that to be the case because, like I
Okay,
said, we didn't start dating or becoming romantically involved until
more of a
about
work
a year
situation.
after I left my husband, and we had known each other a couple of years before that.
Okay, okay,
Okay. So
all right.
we started going out because we went out to different, activities as a group, because we all congregated. That's what we did
Mhm.
back then. We did the house parties. There were a couple of little clubs in town, and dances that they held at like, the Shriners or wherever. And that's what we did.
Yeah, you had
So
your little click. You had your little click.
exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. So I would say no, that wasn't the case for me.
Oh, okay.
Not only that, this man was so good at being charming. He even had, my mother charm that the first year we were together, she got him a whole outfit for Christmas and all that. She had never treated anybody like that that I knew of, that I was dealt with. But anywho, he 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 was just as charming as he could be evil.
Mm.
Um, and so we we dated. The baby came. We ended up living together, and he just became so possessive. He couldn't have any friends because he felt like they all wanted me,
Mm.
and he was just becoming increasingly just disconnected from everything. He wanted to put us all in a bubble And that's basically how we lived, because we really didn't have company that much. Because like I said, there would always be end up being some sort of friction. Usually his imagination. Um, so it it began to isolate me, because he started getting angry at times, and eventually he started physically abusing me. He was really not kind to the kids either. Um, so I tried to I tried to get away from him. First of all, I tried to get him to leave, because we just weren't getting along, and he just refused. He just flat out refused. I had the police. There were countless numbers of times that the police were at my house.
Mhm.
Um, I
So it
Go
went
ahead.
from you all coming together on good terms to straight not being so good. It was never an opportunity to say, well, maybe we need to sit down and have counseling or everything. It just quickly switched to the bad stuff. It wasn't even an
James,
opportunity to think
James,
about.
counseling in 1975. Really, really, James, counseling. You did
Yeah,
you say that to me?
nobody thought about that. Nobody thought about that. Right? You're right. And plus, it was a stigma
We wouldn't have been
about.
able to afford it anyway.
Right, and it was a stigma about, seeking help like that, you know.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So you don't really talk about it to other
Mhm.
people. And from my perspective, you couldn't run the risk of talking to the wrong person, which I ended up doing probably a couple of times. And
Getting
I
back
ended
to
up,
him.
yes, I ended up getting beaten for it. Um, and that's before things started escalating to the point where he couldn't control himself even in public. The
Even
way
in
that
front
it
of people.
started was always behind closed doors.
Hmm.
There was a while that I tried to go and get certified in accounting. Um, Went to Key Business College for a while. I had
Hmm.
to quit because there were days when I had black eyes and I couldn't go to school. So I eventually quit that. Um, when I knew that he was really off the beaten path was uh, he once he got angry, and he went outside. He was walking up and down the street, talking and cursing to the top of his lungs, just walking back and forth, just walking back and forth. And that was one of those times when I did end up having to call the police. I remember one time he had one of his best friends oh, came over to the house for something or other, and he got mad. He took me into the bedroom and he literally tore a pair of jeans off of me.
Hmm. Yeah. Take your
Because
time. Take your time.
yeah, he felt that his friend wanted me, and as it turned out, he did. But that's not what a person should be concerned with. You should trust me. If you're my partner, I feel that you should trust me. I don't have control over anyone else's behavior, only my own. Um, so, at any rate, uh, I ended up getting out of that situation. I moved from pillar to post so many times trying to get away from him. I went and um, spent nights at my friends' houses and it's such a small area that he knew everybody that I knew.
Yeah.
He would always show up. There was I moved out at I think my son may have been about 5 because he had just started school. Um, and At this point in time, he wasn't living with me. There were most of these places he did not live with me, but it was nothing for me to call home from work to check on my children, and he would answer my phone, even though I had left instructions not to open the door for anyone. They were terrified of him. So I would call home to check on them, and he would answer my phone because he was in my house.
So
There was
let me remind the viewers how difficult this is for you to relay this information to us. But what you really want to do is make sure that if you could help one person that might be going through it or been through it's worth whatever the painful, memories that might come back up with you.
It's
And
okay.
that you were so willing to share it. So I just wanted the audience or the viewers to know that. And one other thing I wanted to point out that was, and you can tell us that you told me, I was really surprised how long this went on. How long it went on with him.
My son was born in 1979.
Mhm.
I knew him for about 3 years before that, and of course, the year before we dated, and I got pregnant almost immediately. Um, and I ended up leaving Virginia in, I want to say, 1988,
Mm.
87, 88. Um, so like I was saying, there was this one instance where, now mind you, like I said, the police came so many times. Oftentimes he would be gone by the time they get there.
Of course.
And even above and beyond that, we went to court right around 9 or 10 times. I actually lost count. And he would always somehow manage to get bonded out of jail. I don't know who bonded him out of jail, but whenever he got bonded out of jail, within 30 minutes, he was right back at my front door.
Wow.
There were
And
times.
what makes it difficult too, because you said y'all had a son together, and then
Exactly.
unless there's some abuse there, you can't deny him of his son.
Well,
Unless,
see,
but I guess you have to go through court to do that, and you have to have all this
exactly.
proof and everything.
That
But
is a
that
part of
wasn't
my
happening.
story. And
Yeah, we're
remember,
gonna continue.
we're talking over 40 years ago. It was different
Yeah,
then.
different. Yes, indeed.
I mean, abuse existed, but we grew up in a time where people do spank their kids. You
Right.
know, they can spank their kids and somebody call the police. And for me, if I spanked my kids and they they wanted to reprimand me or take the child out the house, be like, go ahead, you raise them. Okay. That's the kind of attitude we had back then,
Yeah, yeah.
because
Very
you
seldom
didn't,
that happens.
right, because kids couldn't just call the police, you know, and
Right.
and get picked up. It had to be pretty intense
Hmm.
for um, for welfare to take a child out of a home back then. So at any rate, there was this one particular incident where um, he had my daughters were not at home for some reason. I guess they had spent the night in maybe my mother's house, um, and I had my son. Well, he was at my house. Now, mind you, there were some times when I came home from work and put my key in the door. and he'd be coming walking down the stairs. I'm not talking about when my kids were there. He would break into my house. There were nights when we'd be sleeping. He would break in. He would climb up the building because there were 2 stories. It was like a townhouse. And he would break in upstairs and get into my house. So this particular time, he was holding me against my will, would not let me leave. And so I guess my son was asleep. I don't even remember that part, but I do recall that he was holding me against my will. He had me laying on the sofa in the living room, and he was telling me to go to sleep. If I didn't go to sleep, then he was going to give me a reason to stay awake, which meant he was going to rape me. So eventually I convinced him that I needed to use the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom, which was upstairs. These are older built homes, so our bathroom was upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
I went upstairs to the bathroom, and I ended up climbing out of the bathroom window and jumping off the roof. And I ran for my life in the middle of the night. It had to have been about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. One of our mutual classmates, not from our class, but my class that I should have been with, she lived maybe, I would say maybe the equivalent of about 5 or 6 blocks from where I did. So I just ran in the middle of the night, and I ended up knocking on her door, and she took me in.
Oh.
So that saved me that time. There was another time that I can recall living in the same place. I decided I was going to date somebody, and I did. Well, I had my friend over, and my ex came, knocked on the door, pushed his way into the house. He went and turned my TV off in front of my company and said, "I bought this TV. Y'all can't watch this."
Mm.
Him and my company ended up getting in a fight. I ended up in the fight. I jumped on his back trying to help my friend fight him. It was so crazy. So we ended up having to go to court for that. The reason I'm citing this particular incident is because when we went to court for that particular incident, there was a judge that worked there. And I mentioned his name to you. I'm not going to mention his name now, but that was 40 years ago. This judge was actually falling asleep listening to my case. His eyes were rolling around, and he was sitting on like this, and his eyes were rolling around in his head while as I stood before him.
So what were you trying to get? Were you trying to get an order against him to stay away from you?
I was trying to get him locked up so that he could leave
Or
me alone.
And I guess if the judge was falling asleep, that didn't turn out too well, did it?
No, it didn't. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure if that was the particular incident because, like I said, we went to court so many times. I'm not sure if this was the incident, but one of those times that we went to court, he got off just on a technicality that, back then everything was paper. There was no computer then. Everything was paper, but they actually checked the wrong box for what the disposition of the case was. And he was able to get out.
Got dismissed. Yeah.
It just that simple. I feel all in all, and I guess I'll elaborate more down the road, but I can't help but feel that the police department there failed me.
Certainly
And
sounds so.
I'll tell you why. Well, so I can wow, there's so many incidences. And the reason it took so long, I'm like an open book, okay? And I don't mind telling my story, but I
Hmm.
do know that even on this podcast that my children are watching, and
Okay.
it not only affects my life. I know for a long time I felt like they were embarrassed to even talk about it. They really didn't even want to think about it. But I do know that just last week, I was speaking with my beautiful daughter, and I was telling her that, we got on the subject of P, P. Diddy's demise.
Hmm.
And I was telling her that um, I couldn't watch the video anymore of what's her name? Cassie
Hmm.
Ventura.
Yeah.
Uh, I couldn't watch that video that we've all seen uh, anymore because it was so similar to one of my own incidents that happened to me. I was her. There was a time when I had a friend who was, back then we had VCRs. I know younger people don't know nothing about that, but we had
Look it
VCRs.
up. Google it.
Mine was mine was acting up, so I had a friend, a male friend, who said he would take a look at it. So and he worked in the same area that I did. He gave me a ride home because I didn't even have a car then. So we got out of the car when we got to the apartment complex, and my son's father came from out of nowhere, and he grabbed me by my hair and he drugged me across that cement parking lot by my hair,
Just like
scraping up my
similar to
knees
that,
and legs. Hmm?
similar to that thing that you said you couldn't watch anymore.
Exactly. He grabbed me by my hair and drugged me across that cement parking lot. My kids were in the house. My friend ran alongside him and just kept saying, "Let her go, man. Let her go. Let her go." And he acted like he wasn't even there. So he drugged me across the parking lot, down the sidewalk. And when he got to my house, we went in the house. He drugged me into the house and slammed the door in my friend's face. And the kids were inside, they were in the living room. And he was really on a rampage, I guess, because I was with my friend.
Hmm.
So my kids were screaming and crying. And I remember he kept telling them, "I'm not going to hit your mama no more. I'm not going to hit her no more." And then within 30 seconds, he was hitting me again. And so when I referenced that incident with my daughter last week, and my daughter is, she's 5 decades now, okay? But she said, "Mama, I remember that."
You mentioned your children, and so often these days we hear people talking about the children, kids acting out in school, and I always say you never know what that kid is seeing at home.
That's right.
What's happening at home that's causing him to act out because they might not necessarily want to tell you. Like you said, your children were embarrassed, want to tell you this is going on in my house, so they act out in another way. Do you think how would your children, and you say now your daughter, still remembers that after all this time? Were they? I don't know if they showed any signs of being affected along the way. They had to be pretty much traumatized doing that, to see their mother going through all of that,
Absolutely.
just to hear
Ab-
the loud yelling and everything like that.
Absolutely. And I feel so, oh, not just the yelling, he beat me in front of them.
Yeah, yeah, the yelling and abuse.
Um, just, just to when she said, Mama, I remember that. And it's been so long. That was 40 years ago, almost 40 years ago, 35 for sure. But it just, my heart just dropped because I feel for her. I really feel, I guess a part of me feels guilty that I brought this into their life. My choices
Hmm.
affected their life adversely. And then I try not to beat myself up too badly because he fooled everybody.
Yeah, just like you said, the family members and one
He
of
fooled everybody.
one of the other guests we were going to have on, and probably later on we'll have her back, Kalima Overton Amin, who wrote the book Hidden in Plain Sight about narcissists and how they groom everybody around you. Uh, and they groom you first, and then they groom the people around you. So it makes it a little harder for you to try to explain, because sometimes you're in a situation that people say, "Well, girl, what did you do? What did you do to cause him to be that way?" And it was
I've had
nothing you did. It was a part of his personality anyway. It's actually a psychological affliction that men have.
not only that, I've had people, like I told you, I've had people that ask me, well, what kind of blankety blank you got?
Yeah,
And it wasn't funny. It really wasn't funny. It isn't funny. It really has nothing to do with me.
all him.
That's what I know now.
Yeah, well, nobody knows in the beginning, because like Kalima says in her book, that they're so charming in the beginning, and there's no way, and it doesn't have to be like Prince Charming. It's just a normal, he treats me okay. With, like you said, in the beginning, you all work together, friends, and went out
Accommodating.
together. Yeah,
Just,
right. A group, we all go out together and everything like that. So you have no idea, when you start getting closer, that this person is going to turn into that. And then once you're in it, then you have to convince people around you, you know, that it's him, not me, because he has charmed them to the point where they can't believe that he
but
even would act like that unless you
exactly,
provoked it.
exactly, exactly. I remember sharing some details with an older lady. She was like a mom to all of us. He knew her first because she lived in his neighborhood. As a matter of fact, her son was his best friend.
Mhm.
But I shared some of his behavior with her, and the next thing I know, I was getting beat up because I talked to her about our business. So time went along. Like I said, I ran from pillar to post. Man, I lived with my mother for a while. Now that's one place that he would not break into.
Mhm.
Uh, However, he always used I want to see my son as an excuse to come and knock on the door.
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
Um, I'd like to tell you about an event where an incident where we went to a dance at the Shriners Club. Well, I went to a dance at the Shriners Club. We were not together at all. He just happened to be there. He just happened to be there. I remember I was on the dance floor dancing, and he came on the dance floor. He grabbed me by my arm and told me to dance with him. I said, I don't want to dance with you. He would not let me go. There were two guys there. I didn't know them, but they came to my rescue. And he eventually let me go. Well, now, of course, it's time to leave because I can't enjoy myself here anyway.
Right.
So they asked me if I wanted them to walk me to my car, and I said, please, if you don't mind. So they did. I got inside my car, started my car, and went home. They followed me home to make sure that I got home or to my mother's house. Well, as soon as we pulled up to my mother's house, I was able to get inside the house before he got a chance to get out of his car and get up to the sidewalk to my mother's house to do anything to me. So I heard him arguing with the other two guys outside after I got inside the house. And eventually they left. The next morning when I got up, I had a pretty good sized car. What kind of car was it? That may have been my Duster. But anywho, when I came outside, because I needed to take my mother, the next morning was Sunday morning, because that was Saturday night that incident happened. I got up to go take my mother to work. And when I went outside, my side view mirror was off the car. All four of my tires were flat. I'm 5'2". I could look over the top of my car.
Mm.
So later on, I found out one of the guys, they got my number, and we talked for a while on the phone. But I found out that him and his friend had just recently been released from prison for raping somebody.
Well,
So that's the kind of position I was in. That's the kind of help I had to enlist. Didn't know at the time, but it could have been even worse.
yeah.
So the guy told me, he said, I could get rid of your problem if you want me to. I said, no, thank you. I'm gonna be all right because no.
No. When did it start occurring to you that enough was too much? Enough was enough, and I realized, being in a smaller city, and like you mentioned earlier, wherever you went, he was able to find you, or somebody knew him or knew you, knew where you were. And, it's kind of hard in the city that we live in where somebody doesn't know somebody. And it's your comfort zone. It's the place you grew up into. So you figured,
It's all I ever knew.
somewhere in this city I can be safe, especially at your mother's house.
It's all I
And
ever
so when did it start occurring? When did you start saying, "Hey, I'm gonna have to do something. I'm gonna have to make a move"? And I know it was still going on then, and you had to think about your children and where can I go? I've never been outside, pretty much outside of the city. You know, what do I do? Where do I go?
knew.
Need
When
money to
I
do all the
when I
things.
left, I'm going to tell you what happened. The trigger incident that led me to leave actually started with the Oprah Winfrey Show.
Okay.
I was in my apartment. I don't know how we fast forward to that end, but anywho, I just want to say that during all of those years, there were times when I had to get my kids up in the middle of the night and go and stay at a motel in order to get a good night's sleep.
Were you ever
Because
hospitalized or you braved through that?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
But you could have been.
I
You were
don't know,
injured enough
man.
to
I've been
possibly.
so blessed. Well, I can tell you that when I went into eventually I went into a shelter for battered women, and when I entered,
Mhm.
my face was four different colors: black, blue,
Mm.
purple, and pink. Um, but anywho, what happened was my aunt, God rest her soul, she worked at the Portsmouth Psychiatric Clinic,
Mhm.
somewhere over there by the Naval Hospital. So she was telling me about um, this place, uh, this battered women's shelter. Of course, I didn't know anything. You just didn't talk about stuff like that back then. But because she was in that area of healthcare, she knew about those things.
Mhm.
So she told me that she was going to try to get me in there because the trigger incident had happened where we were at home. The TV was on, as that's what we did back then. And when you're home, TV's always on. This was at Oprah Winfrey show came on at 4 o'clock every day. This particular show that she aired was about battered women syndrome, which
Mm.
was something pretty new to most common folk at that time. Because again, this was 40 years ago. So both of my girls were sitting in the living room watching TV, as was I. They were sitting on the sofa. I was sitting probably at the kitchen table, which you could see the TV from there. And both of the girls were, whispering back and forth. And so he was sitting there watching them. He never missed anything. So he turned to me and said, "What are they over there whispering about?" I said, "I don't know. I'm sitting over here with you." So he asked my girls, "What y'all talking about?" And my oldest daughter, she sat up and stuck her chest out and she said, "This program is about battered women's syndrome. I think that's something my mama's going through."
So the children are aware.
When she said that, he became furious. I mean, furious. She had she had pulled back the covers. These are things we don't talk about.
Mm.
She had uncovered his secret. She let him know that she knew what he
I
was
know
doing.
what you're doing.
People knew.
Right.
This is when he really had to face that other people know what you're doing. Needless to say, there was hell raised that night. The next morning, when we got up, I had to take my daughter to school. Left out of the house. He came out behind me, met me at the car, and said, "Where you going?" I said, I'm going to take her to school." "Oh no, you're not going to take her to school. Not I put that gas in that car. That's my gas. You can't take her to school. She cannot ride in that car today." So we went back and forth about it because I'm trying to take my child to school. This man picked me up and threw me over his shoulders and took me back into the house. And my daughter couldn't go to school. Eventually, he had to leave to go to work. I packed up some things and I actually went to my neighbor's house, and I really didn't know them because you really there's a level of isolation that has to be maintained when somebody has a mentality like his. So I knocked on the door and I told them that I was having some problems with my child's father. And if they heard anything amiss, any noise, just call the police. So I packed up some things and I went to my other aunt's house who lived in Virginia Beach. She I think was probably the only person that I knew that he didn't know where they lived. So I um, I went on to work and I saw this same guy that was coming over to fix the VCR. I saw him at the mall and I asked him, I told him what had happened, and I asked him, would he go with me to home to get some extra pillows and blankets? Because my aunt was, she was single and had the wrong aunt. She was single and she wouldn't have pillows and blankets for me and my three kids enough, you know. So I wanted to make sure everybody was comfortable. He said, okay. So we went to my apartment. We left my car at the mall, and he brought me to my apartment to get the pillows and blankets. So where we lived, the you actually went into the back door more so than the front door, because in the back of the apartment complex was where all the parking spaces were. So he pulled up and we went to my kitchen door, put my key in the door, and I opened the door. My friend was behind me, getting ready to go in with me. I opened the door, and to the left was my kitchen counter, and of course it was dark in there because it was supposedly no one home. And I saw the light on my coffee pot, and I knew I didn't leave my coffee pot on. So I knew he was in there. I took one step back to close the door. He reached his hand from around the kitchen door, grabbed my arm, and pulled me in there and slammed the door on my friend that was behind me. He beat me up in the dark. And after it really got dark, because when we went there, it was pretty much dusk. I say maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, and this was when it got dark around that time. So when it got really pitch dark, he decided he wanted my car. So he made me walk with him from there to the mall to get my car. Like I said, he had beat me up in the dark. I knew that my face was swollen. I could feel it. But when he had me walking down the street, he held my head in a headlock that actually hurt my face because it was swollen and sore. That's how far up he had his elbow, and he had me in a headlock walking me down the street. And when I tell you, when people back then, when people see something, they don't say anything. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to run the risk of getting hurt themselves, I guess. But we did pass a few people along the way. It's the point that I'm making. So I went and got the car for him. And that day, that was the last time I ever laid eyes on my apartment. My aunt made arrangements for myself and my three kids to go into the shelter. They have you to meet them at a certain restaurant. Um, so that they can take you to the shelter, which is in an undisclosed location. I can't even remember how I got my car back, but I did. And I made arrangements to meet these people so that we could go into the shelter. Because when I tell you he showed up everywhere, he showed up everywhere. There were times when I pulled up to a stoplight, and the next thing I know, he was knocking on my window, the driver window. He has pulled me out of the car at stoplight. We have fought in the car on the interstate while driving.
That's why I'm sitting here speechless almost, because I just can't imagine. It seemed like the more you talk, the worse it got. And I'm just thinking about the time it was between that time you decided, oh, hey, I'm going into the shelter. All that time in between, all this abuse was going on. And it's just hard to imagine. And people now watch these shows on TV and think, oh, wow, the writers really did a good job. But the writers are really reflecting somebody's real life.
Could very well
And
be.
we look at it on TV and think, oh, wow, yeah, they had a little bit of a dramatic licensing, to add a little bit to make it. But hearing you talk, this sounds just like,
James,
somebody
when I
TV
tell
show.
you, at one point I worked at a department store. This man would come and harass me on my job. There were two entrances to the store, one on the mall side and one on the outside.
And I have seen that happen before.
They they had security on watch for him.
Mm.
He showed up everywhere. I don't know when he ever slept. I really don't know when he ever slept. At one point I thought maybe he must have a pact with the devil.
Yeah.
Because no
His
human
mission
could
in life
spend
was
this much time.
his
Anyway,
mission was to make your life miserable. And
he
that
was
was all he
determined if
thought
I
about.
wasn't going to be with him, then I just wasn't going to live in peace.
Did he work, Sona?
No, sir. The devil is a liar.
He is.
The devil is a liar because it got to the point where I had a long talk with God because I just felt like I am not living. This is not life. This is not living. I'm not living. Every move that I make, every breath that I take depends on where this man is and what he's doing. I am not living. I cannot live like this. I would rather die.
But you had to think
So
about the children.
exactly. And my mother her attitude was, if I keep your kids, they're just gonna be worried about you. I was like, I've never been separated from my kids. I've been separated more from my kids since they've been grown, because that's a whole different story.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a whole thing. Yeah. Tell me about that. They grow up and go away, but
Man,
long
boy,
as they're
do
healthy
they
and
go
doing well.
away. Mm-mm-mm. But I just I couldn't live another day like that. I just couldn't. So
So
the
you
day
had to
that
put,
we went into the
you
shelter,
eventually had to put Portsmouth in the rearview mirror, right?
I did, and it was all I knew. It was
All
all
you
I knew. I had been there my entire life. Hadn't done much traveling. I didn't know anything about anywhere. I was just green as your shirt.
knew.
But I still had to take care of these three beautiful souls.
Yeah.
They depended on me, and I have to keep
You
going
definitely
for
had
them.
to get them compensated.
I can't I can't commit suicide because I don't feel like no one can. You feel like nobody can raise your child like you can raise your child. I wouldn't do that to them.
But had you gotten to that point?
I can say that I thought about it before, but not for long because I have these children. Who's going to take care of my children? I just have to be here to make sure my kids are okay.
Yeah, and I figured that would be your answer. And the only reason I asked that because it sort of verified how bad it was. You get to that point where you say, look, like you mentioned, I can't live like this. My every waking period is worrying about where he is and how I can not get beat this time or
He
not be
did.
verbally abused or whatever was going on.
There was this one instance where it was summertime, and well, the first instance, what I can tell you is he came to my window. Back then, we didn't have this place was didn't have central air. You had screens in the window.
Mhm.
It's nice breeze coming through or whatever. But he came to the screen and he put a gun up to the screen to let me know that he would kill me. So there was this other time when my son was outside playing. He was 5 at the time, and he no, let me take that back. He wasn't playing. He was in the house playing. He called him over to the window, the screen. He took the screen out and he took my son. I called the police and they went after him. They put me in one of their cars. After they found him, they pulled him over at a gas station. So I overheard two of the police talking outside of the car, and one of them asked the other, "Well, who has custody?" And so the other one said, I don't think either one of them have custody."
How could that be?
Well, back then, if whoever has the children has custody.
Right.
But and this is obviously is something that you did not know and I did not know. When they had that conversation, they said that, well, if neither one of them have custody, then we'll have to take him and put him in foster care until they get that ironed out. And I'm sitting there in the car thinking, oh, ham sandwich, no. You're not, nobody's putting my child in no foster care. So I told the police officer, I said, let him have him. I don't believe that he will hurt him. And so they did. And he brought him back to my house later on that evening. He just wanted to get my attention. But best believe the next day I filed for custody of my own child.
Make sure, make sure it was.
I filed for custody of my own child, legal custody of my own child the next day. So fast forward to the day that we went into the shelter. I had my car. I had everything. Um, I had everything I was going to take with me because I couldn't get anything. I couldn't even go back to my house because he was everywhere. So my aunt made the arrangements with these people to meet me at this restaurant so that they could get us into the shelter. He found us. He followed us all around town. I was literally running in my car from this man. He was following us so closely that every time I would slow down to turn a corner, he would hit my car in the back. My kids were screaming and crying in the back seat. And I was just trying to run to get to safety. Going around blocks, trying to get to these people to get us into the shelter. When we didn't make it there on time, what the police did was, well, what the people at the shelter did was arrange with the police to pull him over. That's the only way we got away from him. They pulled him over at a 7-Eleven to detain him so that we could get to the restaurant to go into the shelter. I don't know if he got locked up or what. I don't know what happened to him after that, but I know they pulled him over. And that's why, because the people from the psychiatric clinic called them. So when we went into the shelter, we were there for about 3 months. I did some research while I was there. They have this big directory there of the whole network of shelters all across the United States. And one of the counselors there at the shelter grew up in Snellville, Georgia. And she was telling me about this place. And it was pretty cool to work. I'm sorry, to live there for children and so forth. So I started doing research on the population of different places, not just there, but different places, the ratio of white to black, what the job market was like, housing, all of that. I started doing research. And I decided that we had to go somewhere. We couldn't go back anywhere in the city we lived in. Because truly, in my heart of hearts, by that time, I knew in my heart of hearts, I felt that somebody is going to die. I didn't know if it was me. And at this point, I could actually envision one of my children killing him. But I just knew somebody is going to die. So while I was at the shelter, that was in the winter, because I remember for Christmas, my brother came and got my children from the shelter in the undisclosed location at I don't know, it might have been 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, pitch dark, for them to go to my mother's house to eat Christmas dinner. I was technically in danger, so I had to stay at the shelter. So I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwich for Christmas dinner at the shelter. That's a memorable Christmas.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were there for 3 months, and while we were there, we met some nice people who were going through similar situations from different places. Actually, I met this one young lady who she was really we just vibed, we really gelled. She loved my kids, I loved her kids, and she told me she had been in school to be a dental hygienist, and she wasn't able to finish. I think she was from Philadelphia, I want to say. How she got all the way to where we were, I don't know, but there were people from other places there. And so I thought about one of our classmates who was a dentist. And so I found his number and called him to see if he needed any help. I explained to him, her situation and everything. And he told her, yeah, she could come work for him. So that made me feel really good. So this is how I started talking to him.
Mm-hmm.
He, in turn, just happened to have a frat brother in Atlanta where I was planning to move to. So he called his frat brother up and told him his one of his sisters was coming there. Look out for, So it was good to have at least that connection, even though I didn't know him. So when January came, I got to file my income taxes while I was in the shelter. And I got my mother to cash the check. So she cashed the check for me, and she got us 4 one-way tickets on Amtrak to Atlanta, Georgia. So when the time came to leave, my brother came and picked all of us up in the middle of the night, so that we couldn't be found, really, and took us to Williamsburg to the Amtrak station. And we headed for Atlanta, Georgia. And while I was in the shelter, the date to go to court, the date that we had to go to court for when I filed for custody of my son, that came up while I was in the shelter for battered women. So they made sure that I got to court. I got to court, and I told my truth, and the judge also asked one of my children a couple of questions. Well, as hard as it is to have parental rights taken away from any parent, they took all of his away. No access to his child, or he would go to jail. Restraining order.
So
that was good.
Finally saw some progress there.
That was a blessing.
After all those years, yeah. I'm sure that was a blessing, yes.
Yes, that was one time I felt relieved in court. The other time was one of those times that we went to court, and most of the first few times that I went, he would always get me to try to withdraw the charges, the complaint, because he could, because I knew that I was gonna get hurt if I didn't do that. So there was this one incident where we went to court, and the prosecuting attorney was a female. And I said, well, can I just drop the charge? She said, no, I'm not going to let you. When I tell you, I wanted to clap and jump up and down in the courtroom when she said that. She would not let me drop the charges. She said, we're prosecuting this case.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay.
You got the right prosecutor on that one.
So we got while I was in the shelter, when I decided where we were going to go, I put out rumors that we were going to DC, we were moving to New York, different places, because I certainly didn't want him to try to find us. So I got the list of shelters in Atlanta, Georgia. And I called around to them from the shelter there in Portsmouth. And I found this one that was just moving into a new place from another location. So they were like empty right then because they hadn't started moving the residents from the old place in there. And I told them about me and my 3 kids, and we were coming there. And they told me, yes, we have room for you. And I'm like, wow, okay. So I know where we're going now. So we had a really good trip there. The trip from Virginia to Atlanta, you go all the way up to DC. There's like a 6-hour layover in DC. So I took the kids to the museum. We went on a tour. We just had a good time in DC. It just felt free after all we had been through, you know. So when we got to Atlanta, it took 21 hours. 21 hours on Amtrak. So when we got to Atlanta, to the Amtrak train station in Atlanta, I called the police and explained to them that I was coming from a shelter for battered women, and we were trying to get to a shelter for the homeless there, because technically we couldn't go into a battered women's shelter in Georgia because technically we were out of danger because of the distance and all. So we went into this homeless shelter. When I called the police, I told them we were trying to get there. They sent somebody to get us, and the police took us to the shelter. The police officer that took us to the shelter, he was a nice gentleman. I don't remember what he looked like, but he was, he tried to hit on me. He gave me his phone number. I just thought that was just so inappropriate. That was the last thing I needed.
The last thing you were looking for.
Last thing. But he did give us a ride to the shelter, and we stayed there for several months until we got public housing. When we got public housing, after all I had been through, that was like a mansion for me. And when I got to Atlanta, Georgia, when I tell you, my hair was all chopped up and people thought I kept it cut, but it was my nerves. There were times when I had spots in my scalp that were like the palm of my hand. I lost my hair. When I got to Atlanta, Georgia, my hair started growing down my back. It just felt so good to walk down the street with the sun on me and just feel free without having to look over my shoulders. I didn't have anything. I went to Atlanta, Georgia with 5 suitcases and $364 in my purse. That was in 1988. I didn't know a soul. I raised my 3 children. I got food stamps 3 months out of the whole time that I've been in Atlanta. 3 months. I've never had to do anything that I didn't want to do to get what I needed. When I started working at AT&T, I just needed a job. As a matter of fact, I had applied for another job aside from the job at AT&T, which was for operator. And that job consisted of going around to, I guess, encampments or places where the homeless hang out to counsel them, to, care for their needs or whatever. That was the perfect job for me because I had lived that life. And it was between me and another candidate, and they got the job. I couldn't understand that. Because he couldn't have had more experience than me. I don't care how many degrees he had. But things happen for a reason. I didn't get that job. I ended up at AT&T at the time that I got that job. I was working at TJ Maxx as a shift supervisor, and I still kept both jobs for a while until I couldn't work out the time with AT&T, because of course that was my main full-time job now, and I had to let that part-time job go. I worked for years and years, two jobs, um, to take care of my kids. Now, I'm not saying that, there weren't times that the lights didn't get cut off, and whew, there were some
Yeah,
times. But when I tell you,
that
I
was
look
all
back,
part of it
I
too.
got
But
food stamps 3 months out of
yeah,
all of those years. And the only reason I didn't get, because when I first started working for AT&T, I mean, contrary to popular belief, they don't start you out with much money. Well, they didn't then.
mhm.
And I qualified for food stamps for me and my three kids. So when it came time to reapply or re-up or recertify, I think you must have done it every 3 months then. I couldn't get off my job because I was a new hire. So I couldn't get off to get to the appointment to recertify for my food stamp. So I just had to let that go.
And just work it out. But that sense of freedom and not having to worry about at least that, I guess it was refreshing having, well, maybe not refreshing, but having to worry about the lights out, that was small in comparison to what you had been through previously.
Here, bring that candle over here. Sit it in
Yeah,
between all of us.
yeah,
Whatever works. But we made it.
you made it. And
We
I
made
have to
it.
tell you, I'm so glad, and I'm sure a lot of your classmates and people that are watching or that will watch this are glad that you're doing well. We can see that. A lot of people probably had no idea you had gone through all this, but your resilience, and they say us as Black folks, we are resilient. We always find a way to overcome adversity. If we can overcome slavery, we can overcome everything else. Not
I
saying
know that's
that
right.
what you went through, you shouldn't have had to go through. That was no one should have to go through that. But you know, God works in mysterious ways, and I guess some things we have to face. But you faced it, and you came out on the other side. You had the opportunity to raise your children, and I'm glad you had this opportunity too to also share, your story. You probably shared it privately with some other people, but no telling how many people are going to see this and say, "I went through that same thing," or they might see some signs early on and not continue. Say, maybe I better back off of this guy, or maybe I better really get to know him before I let my admiration for him or love for him blind me to the fact that he might not be the best for me. So thanks so much for doing this. And like I said, we're going to bring Kalima back on, who wrote the book Hidden in Plain Sight, to sort of, she's going to see this and sort of go through what you told us today and sort of tie in, her book and the people she interviewed. She interviewed about 5 or 6 ladies with different stories and put it all together and just talk more about your situation in order to help others who are watching. So we really appreciate that. And I know you, what would you say, some young girl or lady come to you and uh, sort of wondering about, say, I really love this guy, but I feel kind of, I feel kind of, my intuition is telling me not to. What would you say to that person? Give it more time. What would you say to that young lady to sort of help her make a right choice? You never know sometime until you get into it, but sometimes you can
Absolutely.
avoid some things by just watching for some signs, in the beginning. What would you say?
If it doesn't feel right, it doesn't matter what the reason is. If it doesn't feel right, you need to go in a different direction. And what
And
I would
and
say,
and it's
as
as simple as that.
As simple as that. If it doesn't feel right, in my case, I don't see any way that I could have avoided that, but because this guy's really extreme. I know it's a very extreme case, and I feel so blessed that I have been graced with the life that I deserve.
Hmm.
I feel so blessed because it just I just don't see any way I could have avoided any of what happened. But what I will say though, it is extremely important to be a support system for the people you love.
Hmm.
Let me say that again. It's extremely important to be a support system for the people you love because what you do to support them can change the whole direction of their life.
Indeed.
And if you
Mhm.
don't, it's not your fault because you're not obligated, but it's your fault because you are your brother's keeper.
Indeed. And that's why I started out, talking about our high school days, because when you're in high school, happy go lucky, you have no idea of how life is going to treat you. So it's never too young to start, sort of thinking about your future and what you want out of life, and not walk
Absolutely.
blindly into something because someone really looks good or they really impress you in the beginning. And I'm not going to say, shy away from all the people, but just walk softly, walk carefully. I'll put it that way. Walk carefully into relationships because we all have made mistakes, in some cases picking the wrong person. But not everybody goes to what you went through. But it's always that chance that could happen if
Exactly.
take your
You
time and look for those signs that a lot of times are right there in your face.
and oftentimes crazy is really smart.
Yes, yeah,
Crazy
and
is
they can
really
be
smart,
really cunning.
very
They
cunning.
surprising. Yep, it's just they just kind of off a little bit. But again, I thank you, and we will do this again, like I said with Kalima, and we'll work out a schedule for us to come back
Okay.
on if you're willing to sort of put it all together. But thanks again, and you really laid it all out. So how do you feel?
Um, I feel good
And
about
you
it.
already relieved because you made that move and things
Mhm.
that's been like 40 years. But that's the kind of life that traumatizing life that can live with you for the rest of your life, even though you have
Absolutely.
moved on into a different stage, a better stage. But you never forget that. I mean, just sitting here listening to your story, I just can't imagine it. No one can imagine it unless you've been through it yourself, how horrific that was. And it's
Horrific
just
is
something that you're just not going to block out. And unless you have some of those things where, your mind just blocks out everything. And that's not a good thing either.
I do think there's a
Definitely.
lot that I have forgotten, and I do think that it is a defense mechanism
Yeah.
that's inborn. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Some things you don't need to remember, but
Yeah.
on the
Some
other
things you don't
side,
need to remember, but don't need to block it all out because then you don't realize why you're acting out on certain things. So why am I acting like this? And you don't know why, and it's because of something you went through, but you blocked out. And then,
well, the saddest part for me is that I went through so much trauma and so intense. Not only do I not remember some of the bad things, I
mhm.
don't remember a lot of the good things.
Yeah, the
And
good things, and that's
that
unfortunate
that
as
makes
well.
me sad, especially when it comes to my children, because
Because there
they're
were some good moments, especially with your
exactly.
children.
They say,
You
"Mama,
you
you
watch
remember
them grow.
when I did so and so, and then you said so and so, and we all laughed and blah." I don't remember that.
Mhm.
I just I don't remember that,
Yeah,
and that
and
makes
they
me feel
remember
real
it because
bad.
you were. You were there
Right.
present, but your mind was on how do I get away from this guy?
When I tell
And
you,
you might smile and say,
survival.
"Oh yeah, that's fine, that's fine." But in the back of your mind, you trying to figure out, am I going to get beat tonight? I mean, is he coming? But and still trying to be there as a mother for your children. Yeah. So some of those things will be blocked out. But you are so brave, my classmate, and I appreciate that.
Thank you,
And
James.
thanks a lot. And you take care, and we'll see you next time.
Okay.
And after I play the ending here, kind of stay on the line so I can talk to you afterwards.
Okay. I'll be here.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
And
everybody.
remember,
To my kids, shout
thanks,
out. I
everybody.
love you. I love my babies.
And I'm sure they love you too. And they're so proud of you, the bravery you showed right here on live on YouTube and Facebook and wherever else we will stream this. Thanks everybody for watching. And if you watched on Facebook, please like. And if you watch it on our YouTube channel, please like, subscribe, and make your comments. You can make your comments after you. I saw some of the comments on here. It was some
Oh,
of them I didn't want to put
I
on.
can't see them. I have to watch the play
Well,
replay.
it was. Let me put this one up. You might know who this person is.
Oh, Robin. That's my boo. Oh, Shona, I'm so sorry you had to go through this. I know it was very difficult for you and the kids, but you are strong and you survived. Yes, I did. I know there are deep wounds, but your story is helping someone. That makes me misty.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the main one I wanted to put up, and people will probably make comments after doing the recording after the repeat because everybody probably couldn't come on. But quite a few of your classmates popped up, Maureen and
Really?
Patricia,
Well, that's
Patricia
one way to
Ricks, and
reconnect with them.
yeah, Peter Bates, and yeah. So
Uh,
you could probably see some more. But anyway,
okay,
take
we'll
care,
see them soon.
and we'll see you next time on the Slim Nations
Okay.
One-on-Ones podcast. Thank
All
you.
right.
Take care.
Good night. Thanks for having me.
Oops. Don't want to go.
It's time for us to sit down at the table and turn this chaos into something stable. For love, one on one. We will not accept defeat, not on our land, not in our streets. Getting it done. Reaching out to save the youth, letting them